Everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and of course I had to talk about the news for Resident Evil being on Netflix. They've been talking about this for a long time. Like I think it was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago almost, where it was first announced. It was like there's going to be Netflix on Resident Evil. It had come up probably two separate times. I think it was like a really big thing where it was like Resident Evil is going to have a show on Netflix, and they're talking about a lot of people had their speculations. I think I even made a video about it, like what I would like to see. And it seems interesting. I will say that. I'm slightly worried, but I'm slightly okay. I know, like, one of the showrunners, I think it's either the showrunner or one of the main writers is, I think, Andrew Dabb, who does Supernatural, which is personally my favorite show. So I was like, okay, I can be happy about that. But then it's this weird back and forth thing. First off, it introduces two new characters, the Wesker kids. Wesker apparently just be popping them out because he has Jake, and now he has two girls who I think would be older. I believe they would be older than Jake because this takes place both before and after the outbreak, which is very interesting. I'm so curious how they're going to play this because with this time jump, it's like, all right, you have Raccoon City. It's supposed to be New Raccoon City, which I thought was the weird thing because I'm like, if it's New Raccoon City, then it should be after the outbreak no matter what. But I guess the New Raccoon City is just the future stuff. So it's so freaking weird. We have two main characters, both past and future, or I guess present if the outbreak is the present, or maybe it's an alternate thing. That's another thing. I do not know if this is going to count as canon. That's the main thing that I'm curious about. I'm like, is this going to be canon, or is this just going to be an interesting story? Because I want it to be canon, but not if it's going to suck. That's like the main thing. Like if they're going to officially make it canon, I truly hope that they are putting everything they have into this. Either way, I do. Even if it's not going to be canon. But especially if it's going to be canon. Like, this has to be on par with, like, the games going forward. Granted, the games are weird and crazy. But they do have, like, a generic sense of story. It's like, alright, T-Virus, G-Virus, Las Plagas, C-Virus. I think there's a few other things in there. The Veronica thing is different and stuff like that. So there's a lot. There are a lot of things. But if they're focusing on characters both before and after the outbreak of Raccoon City, I want to see how this impacts the main characters of the Resident Evil series. Specifically, if they're doing Wesker. So spoiler alert. I guess this is technically a spoiler, but for Resident Evil 5, Wesker dies at the end of that game. So Wesker is dead. So the big thing is, if this takes place beforehand, will we see him as a part of STARS? This would be, I would assume, if it's before the outbreak, then it's even before the first game. So even in Resident Evil 0, he had already been working for Umbrella for quite a while. Like, he was one of their scientists, and that was like the whole point of the first game was, all right, well, let's get some test subjects. Let's see what happens here. And so there's so many questions as far as what are we going to see from him? How often do we see this character? Is he a deadbeat dad? Did he just poof, he took off on the girls? So many questions, but it seems like they're within Raccoon City, so there's just a lot of elements. There's so many ways that they could bring in the main characters of the games. They could have, the characters pop up every once in a while. The kids could go to the RPD and stuff like that. They could run into random characters and things like that. So there's so many questions with it. And then, of course, after the outbreak, how intense are they going to make it? Because based off of what I read, it seems like it's going the route of, like, the movies, where it's like it's mostly zombies and creatures, and like most of the humans are gone. It was like something like there's like 1 billion creatures, but there's only like a couple million human left. It's something like that. And I was like, okay, that sounds like it's more in line with the movies, which makes it feel like it's not really going to be canon. And like I said, I don't mind if it's not. And technically, I guess anything they did, even if they redid the games, it's not like it would fit into a new canon, because the games are the canon. The series would just be a different version of that. So I guess no matter what, it technically wouldn't have been like this is the definitive version now of Resident Evil 0 through 3 or whatever, if they did the games in order, something like that. But now it's just a huge question. It's like, all right, they're introducing two new characters with the girls. I would assume 3. Whoever their mom is going to be is probably going to be in the series as well. Wesker, I would assume, is going to be there, but, I don't think Jake really knew him too well, so maybe he just be popping him out and like, I gotta go. So I don't know. I don't know what Wesker does. He seems like the type of dude that would take off. It makes sense, considering he's literally a supervillain. It makes sense. Deadbeat dad to supervillain. It just happens sometimes. So I don't know exactly what we should expect from this, But I am excited. It's Resident Evil. It's my favorite video game franchise. I wouldn't have the hat and the shirt and all these nerdy things. I wouldn't buy records for the game if I didn't love the franchise. So I'm excited for it. I'm super nervous though because it's Resident Evil. It would be the same thing like if they were like, "Hey, we're getting Metal Gear Solid on Netflix." I'd be super freaked out. I'd be like, "Okay, let's see how that works." I'd be more afraid for Metal Gear than I am Resident Evil because Metal Gear is already like a TV show anyway. Like if you put it in hour-long chunks, that's basically a show anyway. Like the cutscenes are so long, even in the original game, they talk a lot. Like it's already like a show or a movie, so that would actually translate way easier compared to Resident Evil. Because even Resident Evil now, despite them throwing in action cutscenes here and there for like 2 and 3 and like 4, 5, and 6 and things like that, there's still giant chunks of gameplay in those games. Even though we have the cutscenes here and there where the characters interact, that's really it. Especially like Resident Evil 2, especially Leon and Claire don't ever meet up. They meet up one time in person at the gate, and then they talk on the intercom at the very end of the game, and then they each run into like special characters in in their own stories. But that's really it. There's not a lot that's truly happening where it's like, okay, if we took just this hour of gameplay out, oh, it's like an episode of a show. Like it's not, because you're running around getting keys and shooting zombies and stuff, and then you have like some dialogue with the character. So it's not the same sort of element as it would be for more story-driven games. As story-driven as Resident Evil is, the horror is the main point of it. Whereas like you play through long chunks and you go through these dark hallways and fight these crazy monsters, and now we're dealing with 2 young girls both before the apocalypse and then after the apocalypse, and with them being tied to Wesker, it's weird to see like, all right, is this like I said, I doubt it'll end up being canon, but it goes from before the apocalypse to afterwards, where a bunch of humans have been taken out. The world clearly is going to be very different. It's not just like Resident Evil 6 is, or 7 is. It's 7 and 8 are just like their own thing. Like you barely even interact with people in those. Well, I guess we'll find out with 8. But with 7, you're just in like one set location, and it doesn't really tie too much to the overall story. But the rest of the games, we find out what's going on in the world. We know that like, oh, this new thing sprung up over here, or this thing, sprung up over there. Umbrella has become Neo Umbrella, and they're doing this, and they're constantly, they become Tricell, and then so many different things. So I'm wondering how much of that is going to leak over into this series, where you have these girls growing up, and then however they do it, I don't know if every episode will be, maybe half and half. It'll just kind of jump back and forth between, before and after. But there's so many questions, so many thoughts and theories. I'll definitely be doing some update videos on this for sure. Like especially whenever we get a trailer on this, I'll definitely be doing some impressions, and I'll have some thoughts on that for sure. I might even do an actual just straight up reaction. If it's for being Resident Evil like the show, I'll probably just do a straight up reaction for that one. But as of now, I'm definitely excited. It's been, like I said, it's been like 3 or 4 years in the making, I guess, because they have had that. Maybe it was a leak. Like maybe it was just so early that's how it got out, because they have always been working on it. They've just been going through a lot of different things. Within the past 4 years, we've had, I think 7. Yeah, 7 was within the past 4 years. So we've had 7, the remake of 2, and the remake of 3, and now we're getting 8 next year. So we've had some interesting changes within like the whole spectrum of Resident Evil games, and them doing the remakes and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting. Like maybe they've been working on it. They just wanted to have some of these other things done. I would assume that they have to still be working with Capcom at least a tiny bit. So they're like, all right, we know that we're doing this, so hold off on the show, and then we'll decide whether or not it's going to be recreations of the games, or if it's going to be its own unique story, stuff like that. Like there are novels and things for Resident Evil. Like there's stuff with Rebecca Chambers, which I still feel like they need to bring her back in the game. They had her in that last 3D movie, which I was super happy about, because I was like, man, we haven't seen her in like 15 effing years, like as doing something new. It was only Resident Evil 0. So I thought that was cool, but it'll be interesting. All in all, like all we can do is just wait and hope. I want it to be really good. I think with one of the people being from Supernatural, at the very least, the actual horror element and like the drama of that, I think will be fine. I think it's the overall story that I'm mostly concerned with. Like, what's the end goal for this? Are we going to get a mini series? Because they said I believe they said it's only like 8 episodes, 8-hour-long episodes. So is it just, that's it? It's a mini series, 8 hours. This is the story we want to tell, and it's just in an alternate version of the universe. Or are we getting more? Should we expect this to go on? If it does, does great numbers, is it going to go on to a season 2? Is it going to go on to season 3 and so forth? A lot of questions still, but I'm excited for it. Of course, it's Resident Evil. Anything video game related, I always want to do well no matter what because I love video games. But it's my favorite franchise. I just hope it works out. I'm confident thanks to one of the people I know, being from Supernatural, and I personally still love Supernatural. So for me, that helps a little bit. I do like the concept of the before and after thing. I'm more excited about the after, of course, because it's like, well, what happens after the outbreak and how do these characters deal with it? But it's not just random characters tied, just in Resident Evil. These girls are related to the big bad villain, So once you do that, like that brings a lot into it. That would be like, it's Chris and Claire's cousin or something. It'd be like, it better be done right then. If you're throwing in a new Redfield into like the Resident Evil universe, you better be doing some epic stuff. And you're throwing in the daughters of the main villain. As far as I'm concerned, despite him being dead, he's still the main villain of the Resident Evil franchise. It's Wesker. So you're throwing in his 2 new daughters that have never existed before. That junk better be good. And they could, holy crap, they might be doing it. Alex Wesker, Wesker's sister, dang. They could tie that in. They might do it. I talked about this a little bit. Resident Evil Resistance, she's one of the people you can play as. And I thought that was a huge deal because they do... I won't spoil this because this is one of the more recent games. But you should play Revelations 2 because they do something very specific in that game. And I was like, that is interesting. And they haven't touched on it just yet because they've been doing the remakes. And 7, 8 might touch on it, maybe. Because they said it was supposed to be Revelations 3 when it originally was announced, and then they changed it to 8. So they might touch on it. They might not, because it would be a huge difference based on how Revelations 2 went and what we've seen with 8 so far. Granted, that could change, but based on what we've seen, it's probably not going to connect to that. But they did a really big thing in there, and that could kind of tie in to some of the stuff they do with this Netflix show, which I wish I could talk more about that. I really don't want to spoil that one for you guys because, like I said, it's a more recent game. But some very specific stuff happens there, so I don't know. Hopefully it's good. No matter what, I'm hoping it's good, obviously. But I would love to know your thoughts. What do you want to see? What you don't want to see? Based on what they've given us, how do you think certain elements could fit in from the games and just how it'll play out? A lot of questions, a lot of fears, a lot of hopes. But ultimately, I'm going to watch the crap out of this. No matter what, I'm excited. So we'll get it when we get it. It'll be what it'll be. All we can do is hope it'll be great. So I would love to know your thoughts on it. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.